Hi everyone, today I'm talking about all the new to me board games I've played in the month of July in 2021 and ranking them from my least favourite to my most favourite. Now, I will say this probably is the biggest disparity or range of games I've played doing the series so far, ranging from a 3 being my least favourite game of the month all the way up to about a 9 with my most favourite game. I also want to cover 2 expansions, but I'll do that after I've done the board game. So let's get started with my least favourite game of the month. So at number 14 I have Laser Riders. So Laser Riders is kind of a take on the old Tron film series, where you are playing these cardboard tiles down, which basically range in sizes. So you've got ones that have kind of really tight, small curves. You've got one that are long stretch of curves or long stretch of tiles where you're going straight forward. And the idea is you're trying to play them in sequence, trying to basically drive over these different tokens which are randomly allocated onto the board and flip them to your colour. Obviously everybody is doing this at the same time, so tiles are flipping from one colour to the other. You're constantly battling and jostling for position. This game, I struggle with games like this that don't have an element of precision, because this game actually doesn't have a board. It's just played on your table. When you flip out these kind of pods that you're collecting, you have to just flip them like a coin onto the table where they randomly land. And again, I don't like things where you think, oh, is that one over or not? Let's just say it is. Or there's not that science, there's not that precision to determine the rules, and stuff like that frustrates me. I know this is a bit of a fun game, but just a bit of nonsense really. And I suppose in that respect it worked okay, as you're shifting up and down gears. Are you going to keep in the high gears and just keep going, bolting forward, or are you going to shift down and get those nice tight curves to give you a lot more flexibility and a lot more mitigation on where you can actually go? But the game itself was pretty standard. I've seen a lot of stuff like this, and it was pretty. It fell a bit flat for me, and I didn't really find it very satisfying. And again, that lack of precision is just what tipped it over the edge for me. So my least favourite of the game of the month was Laser Riders. My second least favourite, at number 13, is Imperial Classics. Now, this is undoubtedly going to be a bit of a controversial one, because I know this game is immensely popular at the moment, certainly in the hotness, people talking about this one and really enjoying it. And that's fair enough, I've got no complaints and no criticism. This was just a game that wasn't for me. I think I bought this one without doing my proper research that I normally do, because I just saw that this was kind of a civilization style game, an element of deck building to it. And I was kind of willing to try something like that, especially when it got this level of hype, and it's by a designer I really enjoy. David Turtzi at least had quite a big hand in this game. And when I actually got this to the table, I was really struggling through this rulebook. The rulebook is pretty much just like a reference guide, and rather than giving examples and stuff how to play, which is fine, I can normally get around that, but it was a bit of an obstacle to overcome. And when I got the game to the table, I just thought this was a lot of fuss, a lot of fiddliness, for little payoff, at least for me and my personal taste. For example, there was a bunch of decks all over the place that do very slightly different things. You got a bunch of keywords on these cards that do really slightly different things. And I felt there was a lot of work in going through these kind of systems on these different decks for very little payoff in return. And I always find like stuff like that a bit, I feel like I'm treading water a bit and not getting anywhere. And I know there's a big market for games like this and people who love that kind of gameplay. But for me, I just didn't find it satisfying enough. I wasn't willing to pour more effort or time into this game to maybe find something there that's not for me. I think I'm experienced enough now to say, this game I should have avoided and probably shouldn't have played in the first place, because it's just not the kind of game I go for. So, fair play if you like it. It's just not my cup of tea. But unfortunately, I didn't enjoy it, and hence why Imperium Classics is at number 13. So at number 12, I have Island Siege. This is a game, again, nobody really talks about this one. This is quite an unpopular game. This is a game where you're basically playing these cards out, and you're trying to fortify these walls or forts and build stuff behind these walls to try and get victory points or victory condition by deploying all your colonists on these areas or gaining money, for example. But this kind of game I struggle with because it is a bit too in your face in terms of its player interaction. For example, you spend a lot of effort building stuff, and then somebody just attacks you with one of their ships and smashes it down. I find that kind of stuff really abrupt and it rubs me the wrong way, and I don't find it fun. Call me what you will on the back of that, but it's just not the style of gameplay I enjoy, and I find it a bit or very unsatisfying when somebody just has the ability to just roll a few dice and smash things down. But I like the theme and stuff, but it just didn't work for me in terms of its gameplay. And again, another game that I wouldn't really choose to play. So at number 12, I have Island Siege. At number 11, I have a strange one. This is a bit of a placeholder space because I've only played this game once and it's a bit of a placeholder. This is Michael Strogoff. So Michael Strogoff is kind of a racing style game. It's pretty much multiplayer solitaire. You're doing your own thing as you're trying to travel this mountain range and basically get to the end game goal before somebody else does, or the automated piece does. And as you travel along this kind of passage, you're gaining more cards with these different threats on, and those threats, if you have duplicate symbols on these threats, then you're going to suffer penalties or stalling kind of mechanisms that force you to kind of counteract them before you can get moving again. So it has that kind of element of push your luck, almost had a grizzled style vibe where you don't want to get matching symbols. And I liked this a little bit. I thought it has some promise there. However, I'm slightly concerned that there's some things in this game that don't need to be there, and it tried a little bit too hard to add some superfluous things to up the complexity for the sake of it. Now, there were some little additional things that I did like. For example, you had these special characters who can come into play and you could use them for benefits. But a lot of it I just thought was a bit too much for what the core mechanism was and what the gameplay was trying to portray. So maybe a little bit too convoluted and a little bit too much fiddliness for the whimsical, silly, light gameplay that it was. But it was okay. I'm willing to give this another go and perhaps try this one solo because I've heard that this is where this game shines. So at number 11, I have Michael Strogoff. At number 10, I have King of 12. So King of 12 is undoubtedly the lightest game I've played this month. And this is a simultaneous and dice rolling style game that's pretty much appropriate for any age, really. So very little rules overhead. So this game, you are selecting a card from a predetermined deck, so everyone's got the same cards. And everyone is going to reveal those cards at the same time, and if there's a duplicate, they're going to cancel each other out. But then they're going to do different things to kind of mitigate the game state or change the game state, such as you could add 7 to your dice, or you could flip the dice to the other side or roll it again. Some might say, if you've got the lowest value this round, you're going to win. So the idea is you're trying to have, or generally have, the highest value of dice roll by the end of the round, and if you do, you get a certain amount of points, and if you get a certain amount of points, you get a victory condition, and if you have 2 victory conditions, then you win. So very light, probably family-friendly level. There's next to no rules overhead here. Nicely produced, some gorgeous artwork, but I think ultimately the gameplay doesn't leave you too much to be explored. I think once you've played this a couple of times, you've pretty much seen everything, and I think it would have been nicer to accommodate a few more players, because this game is actually capped at 4 players. And when I normally see games this light, I like to know that I can at least play with more players. So if I'm waiting for the main event, for example, you can whip out a game like this and just fill a bit of gap. And this one does that fine for, as I said, up to that 4-player count. But I think there's better games out there that do this kind of thing. So ultimately, just not the decision space there for me, and I'm probably not going to be in the collection too much longer. That is King of 12. At number 9, I have Raiders of Scythia. Now, this is, I believe, a re-implementation of the Raiders of the North Sea series, so it's a Garphill game. I could be wrong on that. I know it's one of the games they've done. I get them mixed up. This one, beautifully produced game, lovely artwork, real popping characters. I love the way the game looks. And this is a game where you are basically collecting this little warband of troops. You're going to these different regions. You're raiding the resources there by rolling these dice, potentially suffering wounds and losing crew members as you do. And then it's got some kind of contract fulfillment under that as well. So pretty standard stuff, that kind of Gateway plus Euro level. This one did have a bit of a twist where if you deploy a worker onto the board, and you've got workers of different colours, you can pull another worker off the board to get that action as well. So you're getting 2 actions, one to place onto the board and one to remove one from the board, which is kind of leads your next turn. It was fine stuff. It's stuff that I've seen 1,000 times before. Nothing really to separate this one from the pack. I know this is a popular series of games, but and they are good. They're well done. There's nothing to complain about them. They just didn't quite have that extra element of specialness or uniqueness that make them stand out for me. So a nice game for, again, that more family weight, that Gateway Plus style gamer. But I normally like the kind of medium heavy style games of this genre, and I find these a little bit lacking in terms of decision space and satisfaction. So perfectly fine, but ultimately not one that I'll be looking to play too much more. That is Raiders of Scythia at number 9. At number 8, I have Inish. So another immensely popular game, and this is one that I'd heard a lot of good things about, and I was somewhat unsure if it was going to be to my tastes, because it kind of fits or kind of walks that tightrope between being more Euro leaning or more Ameritrash leaning, because it does have some in-your-face confrontation, but it doesn't have the dice rolling. The victory conditions are a little bit different in terms of controlling different regions, or being in areas where you have these shrines or sanctuaries, or even just dominating other people's pieces. So I quite liked the victory conditions and the element that you had to basically reveal that you were in a winning state, and other people had to try and stop you. And if they couldn't, you would win. But if they could, the game would continue. So it had a slightly different vibe, a slightly different tempo to a lot of these other dudes on the map style games. And the artwork itself is spectacular. It's one of my favourite styles of artwork I've seen, and probably one of the most beautiful games I've ever seen. And I also like the fact that your actions are determined by the card drafting system. So there's only going to be 4 cards per player in play, plus 1. And then you're going to draft some cards, pass them on, keep going on, and that's going to show what actions you can take in the round. But I love the fact that the more you play this game, you can learn what those cards are, you know what you're giving to other players, and you've got some good mitigation, some good autonomy there, knowing what other people can do. However, there were some issues I had with this game. Number one being the combat system. A bit like Island Siege, I found this a bit too abrupt in terms of just smashing each player and taking turns removing pieces from the board until you kind of stop, or until you've exhausted all your action cards, because you can choose to get rid of your actions instead of losing pieces. And I just find that stuff a bit, you can be as clever as you can by doing all the other stuff, but when it comes to combat, it's just a free-for-all, and it gets a bit too in your face for me. Additionally, you had these epic tail cards, which were kind of like game-breaking rules, slightly more amped-up versions of the standard drafting cards you'd take. And I find them a bit too circumstantial at times, and sometimes they're a bit too swinging, a bit too powerful, with little to no opportunity for the other player to counteract that. And I find that stuff, that kind of got you kind of star mechanisms, a bit unsatisfying and not to my taste. But still a really well implemented game, one that I can perfectly understand why people would like this one, but not quite to my taste. So that is Inish at number 8. At number 7, I have New York Zoo. So this is an Uwe Rosenberg tile placement style game, the kind of polyomino, tetromino style games where you're trying to fill up your map as quickly as you can. This time it's a zoo, and the kind of twist on this game is that when you play one of these tiles, you can put animals on them, and then these animals breed at certain points, and they spread and spread and spread, which means you can buy new tiles to fill up your board quicker. That's pretty much the gist of the game. If you like games like Patchwork, this one is pretty much a multiplayer version of that. And I'm a big fan of Patchwork. I like these kind of puzzly style games. And this is a good one. I would say it's got nothing massively special about it. That kind of unique thing, a slight different twist of the animals it's minor, but I suppose it differentiates itself just a little bit. And this is the kind of game I'd play anytime with anyone. So yeah, perfectly fine and perfectly pleasant. That is New York Zoo at number 7. At number 6, I have a bit of a pleasant surprise actually. This is Dice Miner. Another really light game, actually, probably the second lightest one on this list this month. This is a dice drafting game, as you're drafting these dice from this mountainscape, and it's got a bit of a novelty as well, where you can only draft the dice on the pinnacles of these mountains, and these dice are going to give you points in different ways. They're going to give you the ability to convert negative points into positive points. They can let you re-roll dice. You get to collect these pip values in order to get big bonuses as well. And once that's done, you kind of go on to the next round, but you keep all the dice you've had in the previous rounds for bigger and bigger scoring. And that's what I liked about this game. It did have a nice game arc to it, where your turns become more and more satisfying. You're getting more and more points, and it's fun. The dice drafting is clever as well, and it has a functional and really a natty little system in terms of how you're drafting the dice in the first place. So I like this one. A nice family-friendly game that sadly I think is going to fly a bit under the radar, but I think I'm gonna try and spread this one a bit more, and hopefully more people become aware of Dice Miner, because I think it's a wonderful family game that I've enjoyed quite a bit. At number 5, going into my shields of quality now. So these are the better games of the month. I'm getting into the good stuff. So my first game with a shield of quality this month is Papua. Now this is a De Vere title, another worker placement style game, but with a twist, as when it comes to your turn, you are rolling a cluster of dice, and then you are allocating those dice to a certain spot on the board, which will lock in the pit value needed to go to that spot for the other players. And that can create some quite interesting decisions, as you can, as I said, lock other people out, and they have to spend resources in order to manipulate their dice to go there. You have to be careful about not to overinvest on each turn, because you become exhausted and have to spend resources in the form of fish in this game. So you have to feed your workers or lose them, basically. It has a nice little push and pull element of wanting to take actions but not want to take too much, knowing when to do things at the right time, knowing when to take resources when they're worth a lot, and so on. It's quite a clever little game with some layers there that aren't apparent at first. I will say there are a few rules issues that should have been more apparent in the rulebook and addressed, but I think the good stuff in this game is enough to overcome those small fiddly elements. And this game had a lot going on. You had that worker placement, you had the dice rolling, you had set collections, you were collecting these different animals, and it even had this kind of blind bidding system where you want to acquire these animals in the first place by bidding them behind your screen to decide which ones you're getting. But of course, if you have these workers available to you to bid for, it means that you probably took less actions in the previous phase. So it has a nice balancing act where you're spinning a lot of plates, and it worked for me. I thought this one, I wasn't expecting much from it. I got this one really cheap on sale, and it impressed me, and it certainly has a lot of interesting factors about Papua. At number 4, I have Air, Land and Sea. So this is a pretty small, almost micro game, a card-driven game, strictly for 2 players, and it's a tug-of-war style game as well, which you might be familiar with games such as Battle Line or Hanmakoji, Shot on Top and that kind of thing. But this one it kind of has a ramped up element of kind of sneakiness and cleverness, as you're playing these different cards into these different fields. Obviously you've got air, land and sea, which are different theatres of war, and the idea is you're trying to dominate kind of 2 out of 3 of those theatres in order to get the most victory points. But this game had a cool system where when you play cards, people could choose to retreat from the battle if they think that it's not going to go their own way, and potentially suffer less points or fewer point penalties in terms of giving points to your opponent than if you were to stay in the fight until the end and potentially go for an all or nothing style strategy. So that was really cool in itself, but I also like the nuances and the cleverness of how these cards interacted with one another. So some of them would be pure kind of strength and would just dominate that way. Some of them you could kind of put face down and they could surprise you in different ways, and they could make things boost other cards and manipulate cards and things. And the fact that this game I think it's 18 cards in the deck, and it just works so well. It's just finely tuned, like a well-oiled machine. And I love games that work like that. And a bit like Inish, I think the more you play this game with the same person, the better it's going to get. So I'm excited to see where this one goes. But initial impressions are top notch. So that is Air, Land and Sea at number 4. At number 3, I have Cocopeli. So Cocopeli, by one of my favourite designers, Stefan Feld, recently fulfilled on Kickstarter. And this is a change of direction for Feld. This is not a big, heavy mechanism with a mechanism style game. This is a simple card-driven family weight game as you're playing cards on your little tableau. And when you play a card, you are unlocking a special, or a little minor, very subtle special ability that you can have. And you're basically trying to play cards of the same type and get victory points, race other people to get those. But I just loved the little elements of what all the abilities could do. I loved how they interact with one another. I liked how you could play cards on your opponent's side of things to stop them having their power, but to actually get a reward in yourself. And it really is a game about playing the right cards at the right time for maximum benefit. And I like the fact that this wasn't a swingy game. There's a lot of these games where you build up to something and you swing from one player to the next, and 1 minute you're winning, 1 minute the next player's winning. This one is a game where the stream of points is subtle. It's a slow trickle of points where you want to constantly be getting points into your system and into your into your pool rather than going for those big crabs. And it's just, as I said, another change of pace. It looks nice, it's produced well, and I'm really excited to see where this simple, elegant system that's boiled down into just a few actions can go, because all the flavour of this game is in those cards, and that excites me. So at number 3, I have Cocopeli. At number 2, I definitely have the heaviest game on this list. This is Anno 1800. So I'm really getting into Martin Wallace games and starting to dig into his back catalogue. Anno 1800 is his most recent design. Only just been released in the UK. I know this one came out last year in the US. This one is pretty grandiose. There's a lot you can do in this game, and it kind of is an economic resource conversion style game, as you are starting with pretty basic resources, and then you're building up by getting more different industries and getting more and more grandiose, luxurious goods, trying to fulfill the needs of your different kind of your citizens, I suppose. And this game has quite an interesting pacing, and maybe a frustrating pacing that could be perceived that way to some players, as you are acquiring more of these people cards and you're trying to constantly fight them off. But when you feed them, you get new ones into your system, and you've got to keep on trying to get around it. And sometimes it can feel like you're drowning in things you've got to do. And I did feel that. I felt that sting, and it was, I thinking, is this right? Are we playing this right? And it turns out we were playing it right. And eventually that curve swings and you start to get through these cards and fight to the end. But I can see why some people might find this game a bit of a slog and a bit tedious and a bit of work, really. It does feel like work at times. But that for me doesn't take away from how clever these little tech trees are. In terms of, you want to build these ships so you can trade with other players, but to build ships, you're going to need wood, you're going to need steel, you're going to need sails, you're going to need cannons, and all this stuff is all in this network you need to build. So to build cannons, you of course need the steel, you need the gunpowder, and all this stuff. And it's all so intuitive and also logical. And I think Martin Wallace does such a great job of breaking down these kind of deep, rich, complex games into logical little solutions and logical trees of actions you have to take. And I'm really impressed by this game. I think there's some improvements to be made on it, and hopefully future expansions or house rules or kind of designer approved rules can fix those. But the system itself, for me, I'm still happy with it, but it can get even better. So Anno 1800, I don't want it to sound negative because it's magnificent game. I loved it, and it was my number 2 of the month. And finally, at number 1, the best game of the month was Keyflower. So Keyflower, I know this is massively critically acclaimed. People love this game, and I finally got this one played, and I feel exactly the same way. This is wonderful. So this is a bidding and worker placement style game, as you are bidding on these different tiles using workers, but when you use these workers, they get locked in on a certain colour, meaning that if other people didn't have these workers, then they couldn't afford to go there. It has this real cool economy, as you can potentially end up giving your opponents workers by using their tiles. This game has everything that I love about board gaming. It's so streamlined, and the key mechanisms or the core mechanisms are just wonderfully elegant and simple in their own right, but they mesh together wonderfully. And I'm just so besotted by this game. It's one of those games that instantly clicked for me, and I thought this was wonderful. And I can certainly see why this game has stood the test of time. I think it's 9 years old now, and it still feels fresh. And not like it's a long time ago, but it feels great. It feels like a classic while still feeling pure and exciting. Loads of different routes to go down, lots of different things to consider. The interaction between the players is amazing. So yeah, I can't say enough good things about Keyflower. This is going to be a mainstay in my collection for many years to come, and it's just a fantastic game that is magnificent. So that is Keyflower, my number 1. So that concludes my board games that I've covered. So I just want to briefly touch on the 2 expansions that I've played. The first one being the first expansion to Cocopeli. So obviously, I said I like Cocopeli. It was my 3rd best game of the month. This one is simply more stuff. So no rules bloat whatsoever. More tiles to play with, new cards to play with, and I love that. This is great. These are all wonderfully injected into the game. You can mix and match them with the base game with no confusion whatsoever. So this is the kind of expansion I love. And this one this expansion as a general gives you more mitigation and more control about getting the cards that you want into your hand. So 2 thumbs up from me for the first expansion to Cocopeli. And the second expansion, more great stuff. This is Let's Waltz, which is the first and only expansion for Grand Austria Hotel. This is kind of a one-stop shop for Grand Austria Hotel content. Probably a bit too much stuff here. There's some stuff that I wouldn't play with often at all. Some stuff that I'll probably play with every game. But the fact that this is going to be the kind of the curtain call for Grand Austria Hotel, I welcome this content. So this is going to be plenty of stuff here to last you forever. So always like to see more stuff from one of my favourite games of all time. So another very positive impression from me for Let's Waltz. So that concludes this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have, please hit like and subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos too. And for everyone else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye.